I was still holding my coffee when my husband slid a prenup across the kitchen table and said, "This protects me if your deal falls apart." What he didn't know, what made my hands stop shaking, was that the $9 million deal he was so eager to guard himself from couldn't close without my signature. And I was already seeing the other woman's name buried in the paperwork. The morning was quiet. Sun through the window. Toast still warm. Then Grant's voice turned careful, almost practiced. He said it was just smart. He said it was about risk. But his eyes didn't meet mine. I picked up the pages. The words felt heavy. Not just about money, but about control. Clauses that moved future profits away from me. Language about partners I never agreed to. A rush in his tone that didn't match his calm face. "This is sudden," I said. He smiled thin and quick. "It's business." But I knew the deal better than anyone. I had built my company before I built this marriage. I knew what protection looked like. This wasn't protection. It was positioning. My coffee went cold in my hands as I read on. A line about pre-existing advisory relationships. A phrase I had seen only once before, in a draft tied to the acquisition. A name flickered in my mind. A woman he had mentioned like she meant nothing. I looked up. Grant was already watching me, waiting. In that moment, something broke and something else became clear. He wasn't worried about my deal failing. He was worried about what I would do once I realized the truth. I set the papers down. I said I needed time. Inside, the fear was turning into focus. Before I married Grant, I built my company with my own hands. I worked long nights at the kitchen table, sent proposals from borrowed laptops, and took calls in parking lots because I couldn't afford an office yet. Every client I won came from effort, not luck. My business was small at first, but it was mine. Back then, Grant barely noticed. When I talked about projects, he nodded and changed the subject. He cared about his own job, his own goals. I told myself that was normal. We loved each other. We didn't have to share everything. As the years passed, my firm grew. I hired people. I turned down work that didn't feel right. Slowly, my income passed his. The house got nicer. Our life got easier. And something in Grant shifted. He asked more questions. Not about my stress or my plans, but about numbers. About who owned what. About what would happen if things changed. He never said he was proud. He joked about me being the boss in a way that didn't sound like a joke. Still, I trusted him. I believed marriage meant safety. I believed love meant we were on the same side. The $9 million deal was the biggest moment of my career. Years of sacrifice, risk, and quiet work had led to this. For the first time, Grant showed real interest. He wanted details. He wanted updates. He wanted to be involved. I thought it meant he finally cared about what I had built. I didn't realize it was the moment my success stopped being something he admired and started being something he wanted to control. That night, after Grant went to bed, I sat alone at the dining table with the prenup spread in front of me. The house was quiet, but my mind was not. I told myself to read it slowly, like any business document. No emotions, just words. At first, it looked normal. Pages about assets, income, and separation. Then I reached the parts that didn't sit right. Clauses about future partnerships that limited my authority. A section about profit exclusions that carved away earnings from projects I hadn't even started yet. It felt too exact, too planned. One paragraph stopped me completely. It mentioned pre-existing advisory relationships. Not general advice. Not possible future contacts. Pre-existing. The words were careful, almost hidden, like someone had written them with a very specific person in mind. I read it again. And again. This was not about protecting either of us. This was about shaping what my company could become. About who could step into my work without my consent. About moving money away from me in ways that would be legal, clean, and nearly invisible. My chest tightened. Grant had said it was just business. But no stranger drafts something this personal. Someone had thought through my future and decided where I would stand in it. I closed the folder and stared at the dark window. For the first time, I understood that the document wasn't a safety net. It was a map, and it was drawn by someone who knew exactly where they wanted me to end up, and it wasn't in control of what I had built. The next morning, I opened the acquisition file on my laptop, telling myself I was just double-checking numbers. I had reviewed these documents many times before. I knew every page, every term. But after the prenup, something in me needed to look again. Halfway through the consultant list, a name stopped me. Maribel Cross. At first, it meant nothing. Then it did. Grant had mentioned her once months ago, like she was unimportant. Just someone from my networking circle, he had said when I asked about a message on his phone. I had believed him. I always did. Now her name was here, attached to the buyer, not to me. I scrolled down. Her role was listed under strategic advisory. The same area Grant had suddenly become confident about. The same questions he had been asking late at night. The same opinions he had been offering about my deal, as if he already knew what the other side was planning. My hands went cold on the keyboard. Suddenly, every strange moment lined up. The nights he came home late but said nothing happened. The way he started talking like an expert about a business he had never cared about before. The certainty in his voice when he said, "This is how these deals usually go." I stared at Maribel's name until the letters blurred. She wasn't just a random consultant. She was placed exactly where my future was being decided. And Grant knew her. The realization didn't arrive like a shock. It settled slowly, heavy and unavoidable. The prenup, the rushed timing, the careful language, the confidence he hadn't earned. This wasn't coincidence. This was connection. And I was standing in the middle of something that had been happening behind my back. After I saw Maribel's name, I couldn't stop thinking. The past started playing in my head, but in reverse, like a film I finally understood. I remembered the first time I said I wanted to hire my own lawyer for a contract. Grant had laughed and said, "Why waste money? We're married. I'll help you." I had agreed, thinking it meant support. Then there were the talks about money. He pushed for joint accounts, calling it unity. I thought it was love. I thought it meant trust. I didn't see how often my income became ours, while his stayed quietly separate in his own plans. I remembered the way he asked questions that felt harmless at the time. Who had final authority on decisions? What would happen if I sold the company one day? Whether anyone else could sign on my behalf? I answered honestly, never wondering why he needed to know. Even his small doubts made sense now. When I talked about expanding, he warned me not to move too fast. When I said I might bring in new partners, he said I should keep things simple. I thought he was protecting me, but he was studying me. What I had called trust was access. What I had called teamwork was positioning. The betrayal wasn't one sharp moment. It was a pattern I had chosen not to see. Each piece alone meant nothing. Together, they formed something clear and painful. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't asking what if. I knew. My marriage hadn't suddenly changed. It had been shifting quietly for a long time. I had just finally reached the moment where I could see it. And once I did, I understood something else. This wasn't about love. This was about control. 2 days later, I asked the acquiring firm for a private meeting. I did not tell Grant. I said I needed clarity before signing anything. They agreed. The room was small. Just me, their lead attorney, and a folder with my company's name on it. My hands were steady, even though my heart wasn't. I asked one question first. Who has final approval on this deal? The attorney didn't hesitate. You do. Only you. I almost laughed from relief. Years ago, when I first took outside funding, I had insisted on one clause. No matter what happened, no matter who advised, no transaction could close without my written consent. At the time, it felt like a small detail. Now it felt like a door that only I could open. Then I asked the harder question. Has anyone else tried to act on my behalf? The attorney paused. He looked at his notes. Then he told me. Grant had contacted them. Not as my husband. Not as a concerned partner. As if he were an authorized intermediary. He had spoken about structure, about advisors, about changes that would make things smoother. Changes I had never approved. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed calm. He doesn't have that authority, I said. We know, the attorney replied. That's why nothing moved. In that moment, everything shifted. The fear I had been carrying didn't disappear, but it changed shape. I wasn't standing on unstable ground anymore. I was standing on something I had built myself. Grant thought he was guiding the deal. He didn't know he was locked out of it. When I left the building, the world looked the same. Cars passed. People talked on their phones. Nothing dramatic had happened. But inside me, the balance had flipped. Quietly. Completely. I asked Maribel to meet me for alignment. She chose a quiet cafe near the office district. She arrived confident, already acting like we were on the same side. At first, she spoke carefully. She said she wanted what was best for the deal. She praised my company like it already belonged to the future we were discussing. Then her words began to slip. She talked about changes that had not been approved. She mentioned advisors I had never hired. She spoke about profit structures that matched the prenup clauses almost exactly. Not guesses. Assumptions. You'll understand once everything is finalized, she said, smiling. It's just a cleaner structure. Finalized. As if the ending was already decided. She leaned forward and said something that settled cold in my chest. Sometimes personal situations complicate business. But those things they resolve. She meant my marriage. In her mind, Grant and I were temporary. A delay. A formality that would be handled. She spoke like someone who had been promised something. Not just access. A future. I didn't confront her. I didn't raise my voice. I nodded. I asked small questions. I let her keep talking. The more she spoke, the clearer it became. She believed she had already won. That the structure was set. That Grant's role was secure. That my signature was a technical step, not a decision. She thought I was there to be managed. When we stood to leave, she touched my arm and said, "It's good we finally met." I smiled back. Inside, I was no longer guessing. I had everything I needed. Every assumption. Every careless word. Every promise she believed was real. She walked away certain. I walked away prepared. The morning of signing day felt strangely calm. Grant moved through the house like a man who believed everything was settled. He joked while tying his tie. He even kissed my cheek, light and easy, as if the last weeks of tension had never existed. In the conference room, the documents were laid out in neat stacks. Pens were placed carefully on the table. Lawyers spoke in low voices. Grant sat beside me, relaxed for the first time in days. This was the moment he had been preparing for. I held the papers in my hands. They were heavier than they looked. Grant watched me, waiting for the routine act that would make everything final. His confidence was quiet but complete. He thought the prenup had protected him. He thought the deal was locked. He thought his future was already written. I turned the pages slowly. No rush. No emotion on my face. The room stayed quiet. One of the attorneys nodded toward the last page. I lifted the pen. Then I stopped. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just enough to change the air. Grant noticed first. His smile faded. He leaned closer. "Is something wrong?" he asked softly, as if the word itself could not exist in this room. I looked at the line where my name should go. I let the pause stretch. Around us, people waited, unsure whether to speak. Grant's eyes searched my face. Confusion replaced comfort. Then concern. I set the pen down. For the first time, I saw it on him clearly. The moment when a man realizes the future he believed was secured may no longer be his. No one raised their voice. No one stood. But everything had already begun to change. I looked at the table and said, "I won't sign this." The words were quiet, but they landed hard. Grant turned toward me, his voice low and tight. "What do you mean?" "Everything is ready." I kept my eyes on the documents. "I won't approve the deal under this structure." The attorney asked why. I told them. Slowly. Clearly. I explained that my husband had contacted the firm without my authorization. That he had tried to position himself as an intermediary. That the prenup was not about protection, but about redirecting control and profits through outside advisors tied to a personal relationship. I said there was a conflict of interest, and I would not allow my company to be part of it. Grant stood up. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "We can fix this." But the room had already changed. The firm's lead counsel spoke next. He said that because I held final approval rights, any involvement without my consent was invalid. He said they would remove Grant from all discussions, effective immediately. He said the consultant tied to the conflict would also be removed. Maribel's name was struck from the documents. Grant's face went pale. He tried to speak again, but no one answered him. The future he thought was secured began to disappear in front of him, not with shouting, but with signatures that were no longer his to influence. He looked at the prenup on the table like it had betrayed him. Only then did he understand. The document he believed would protect him had given me more power, not less. And I was the only one who could decide what happened next. The deal did not collapse. It changed. After Grant was removed, the firm came back to me with a clean structure. No hidden advisors. No outside control. Just my company, my terms. I renegotiated from a place of clarity, not fear. The work I had built stayed mine. At home, there were no arguments. No dramatic scenes. Grant packed a bag the same way he had once watched me pack for business trips. Quiet, careful, already distant. We did not pretend anymore. I filed for divorce on my own timeline. Not in anger. Not for revenge. Because the marriage I thought I had was no longer real. There were nights I sat alone in the house and felt the weight of what was lost. Not just a husband, but the future I believed in. Trust does not disappear without leaving a mark. Some mornings, the silence hurt more than any fight could have. But there was relief too. In small things. In making decisions without asking. In knowing that what I built was still in my hands. In sleeping without wondering what was being planned behind my back. Grant did not lose everything. He lost the deal. He lost the leverage. He lost the version of me who believed without question. What I kept was not just my company. It was the right to choose my own direction. To protect what I built. To walk forward without carrying someone else's design for my life. There was no victory speech. No celebration. Just a woman standing in the quiet she had earned, aware of the cost, accepting the truth, and finally free to decide what came next. If this story moved you, remember, always read what you sign, protect your legal authority, and never hand control of your work to anyone, even someone you love. Learn how contracts, consent clauses, and conflicts of interest shape your future. Knowledge isn't cold. It's protection.